March 21st, 1801. Dawn broke over the Egyptian desert outside Alexandria. The 28th Regiment of Foot stood in line, muskets loaded, facing the French army to their front. Then someone shouted a warning. French cavalry, hundreds of them, were charging from behind. The regiment was surrounded, attacked from the front by French infantry, attacked from the rear by French cavalry, trapped between two enemy forces with nowhere to retreat. The commanding officer gave an order that would become legendary in British military history. Rear rank, about face. Half the regiment turned around. Now they faced both directions, back to back. Front rank firing at French infantry ahead, rear rank firing at French cavalry behind. And for the next brutal minutes, the 28th Regiment fought surrounded, outnumbered, and attacking from both sides. This is the story of the Battle of Alexandria, the day British soldiers defeated Napoleon's Egyptian army while fighting back to back. The battle where a 67-year-old general led from the front and died a hero. And the victory that ended Napoleon's dreams of an Eastern Empire forever. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're covering one of the most unique tactical situations in military history. A battle where British infantry attacked simultaneously from front and rear, held formation, and won anyway. Because Alexandria wasn't just about defeating the French, it was about British discipline under impossible circumstances, proving stronger than any tactical disadvantage. But before we get to that desperate back-to-back fighting, before we watch the 28th Regiment hold against attacks from both directions, we need to understand how British troops ended up in Egypt fighting Napoleon's veterans in the first place. Because without knowing Napoleon's Egyptian adventure, and why it mattered, you can't appreciate what this British victory achieved. And if you're enjoying this, subscribe. We cover the battles that defined Britain, the impossible victories, the moments of extraordinary courage, the days when British soldiers proved what discipline and training could achieve. Let's go back to 1798, when Napoleon Bonaparte, not yet emperor, but already France's most celebrated general, conceived an audacious plan. He would invade Egypt, establish French control over the Eastern Mediterranean, threaten British India, and build a French Eastern Empire, rivaling Rome's ancient glory. It was bold, it was ambitious, and initially it seemed to work. Napoleon landed in Egypt with 40,000 troops in July 1798. He defeated the Mamluk armies at the pyramids. He occupied Cairo. He established French administration across Egypt. For a few months, Napoleon's Eastern Empire seemed real. France controlled the crossroads between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Britain's route to India was threatened. The Mediterranean was becoming a French lake. Then Admiral Nelson found the French fleet anchored in Aboukir Bay and destroyed it at the Battle of the Nile. Overnight, Napoleon's situation changed completely. His army was trapped in Egypt with no naval support, no reinforcements, no supply line to France. The Eastern Empire became a distant garrison, isolated, slowly withering under the Egyptian sun and British naval pressure. Napoleon tried to expand anyway. He invaded Syria, laid siege to Acre, and was repulsed. His army suffered from plague, heat, and attrition. By 1799, Napoleon realised his Egyptian adventure was failing, so he did what Napoleon always did when faced with failure. He abandoned his army and returned to France. He left 30,000 French soldiers trapped in Egypt under the command of General Jean-Baptiste Kleber, promising reinforcements that would never come. Kleber was assassinated in Cairo in 1800. Command passed to General Jacques-François Menou, a competent but cautious officer who knew his army was doomed without French naval support. The British knew it too. With Napoleon's fleet destroyed and the French garrison isolated, Egypt could be recaptured. Britain assembled an expeditionary force specifically for this purpose, expel the French from Egypt, eliminate the threat to India, and demonstrate that Napoleon's grand strategic dreams could be defeated by British arms. Command of the expedition went to Sir Ralph Abercromby, one of Britain's most respected generals. Abercrombie was 67 years old, ancient by military standards of the era. He'd served for decades, fought in campaigns across Europe and the Caribbean, earned a reputation for competence, care for his soldiers, and personal courage. He was exactly the kind of steady, experienced commander Britain needed for a complex amphibious operation in a hostile climate against French veterans. Abercrombie's force numbered about 14,000 men. British regulars, including Guards battalions, and line infantry regiments with experience from European campaigns. These were professional soldiers, well-trained, disciplined, accustomed to harsh conditions and tough fighting. They'd need every bit of that professionalism, because they were invading Egypt to fight French troops who'd been hardened by 3 years of desert warfare, plague, and desperate survival. The British expedition landed at Abukia Bay in March 1801, the same bay where Nelson had destroyed the French fleet 3 years earlier. The landing was opposed by French forces, but British discipline and naval gunfire support drove the defenders back. Abercrombie's army secured a beachhead and began advancing west towards Alexandria, the main French stronghold in Egypt. General Menou understood the strategic situation perfectly. If the British captured Alexandria, the entire French position in Egypt would collapse. He had to defeat Abercrombie's army before it could lay siege to the city. Menou assembled his available forces, about 20,000 troops, a mix of French infantry, cavalry, and some Egyptian auxiliaries. He had local knowledge, numerical superiority, and the advantage of choosing when and where to attack. The British were advancing across unfamiliar desert terrain, tired from the landing, vulnerable to a sudden assault. Menou decided to attack at dawn on March 21st, 1801. He'd strike the British line before they were fully deployed, use his cavalry to create chaos, break the British formation, and drive them back into the sea. It was a solid plan. If it worked, the British expedition would fail. Egypt would remain French, and Napoleon's prestige would be preserved despite his abandonment of the army. But Menou hadn't fully appreciated what he was facing. These weren't militia. These weren't hastily raised volunteers. These were British regulars commanded by one of Britain's best generals. And British infantry, properly led and prepared, didn't break easily, even when outnumbered and attacked at dawn in unfamiliar terrain. The British were camped in a strong position covering the approaches to Alexandria. Abercrombie had deployed his brigades carefully. The right flank anchored on Lake Abukia, the left near the ruins of ancient Roman fortifications, the centre on rising ground. It was a good defensive position, but not unassailable. And at dawn on March 21st, the French came. French skirmishers hit the British pickets just before daybreak. Shots rang out in the pre-dawn darkness. Drums beat the alarm. British soldiers grabbed muskets and formed up in their assigned positions. Officers shouted orders. Sergeants dressed the ranks. Within minutes, despite the surprise, despite the darkness, despite the confusion, the British line was formed and ready. The main French assault came as dawn broke. French infantry advanced in columns, drums beating, officers shouting encouragement. French artillery opened fire, cannonballs tearing into British formations. But British discipline held. The line stood firm, waiting for the French to come within effective musket range. When they did, British volleys tore into the advancing columns. The French wavered, rallied, came forward again. The fighting became general along the entire British line. Abercrombie, despite his age, was everywhere. He rode along the line encouraging his troops, positioning reserves, directing artillery. When French pressure intensified on the British left, Abercrombie personally led reinforcements forward. He was exactly where a commanding general shouldn't be, in the front line within musket range, exposed to enemy fire. But his presence steadied the troops and showed them their commander would share their danger. The critical moment came when French cavalry, dragoons and light cavalry, found a gap in the British left flank. They charged through, hundreds of horsemen thundering into the British rear areas. This was disaster. Cavalry in your rear meant chaos. Units cut off, formations collapsing. Most armies would have disintegrated under such an attack. But the 28th Regiment of Foot, holding the left of the British line, didn't disintegrate. They were being attacked from the front by French infantry when French cavalry appeared behind them. They were surrounded, completely trapped between two enemy forces. The regimental commander, probably Lieutenant Colonel William Paget, though records are unclear, made an instant decision. Rear rank, about face. Half the regiment turned around. Now the 28th faced both directions. The front rank continued firing at French infantry ahead. The rear rank fired at French cavalry behind. They were literally fighting back to back, a perfect defensive square split in two directions. And they held. Musket volleys dropped French cavalry horses and riders. The French infantry attack from the front was met with disciplined fire. The regiment maintained formation despite being surrounded, despite attacks from both sides, despite every tactical disadvantage. This moment created a tradition that continues today. The Gloucestershire Regiment, successor to the 28th, wears cap badges on both the front and back of their caps, commemorating the day their forebears fought back to back and won. It's unique in the British Army. No other regiment has this distinction, and it honours one of the most extraordinary displays of discipline and courage in British military history. The fighting raged for hours. French attacks were repulsed across the line. British counterattacks drove French units back. The desert sand became littered with dead and wounded from both sides, but gradually, British discipline and firepower prevailed. The French attacks lost momentum. French cavalry withdrew after failing to break the British squares. French infantry, exhausted and bloodied, fell back toward Alexandria. During the battle, Abercrombie was shot in the thigh while leading troops near the front line. The wound was serious. Musket balls in the 19th century caused terrible damage. Abercrombie refused to leave the field. He had the wound bandaged, mounted his horse again, and continued commanding. Only when the battle was clearly won did he consent to medical treatment. By mid-morning, the French were retreating. Abercrombie's army held the field. The British had defeated a larger French force in open battle, repulsed cavalry charges, held formation under attacks from multiple directions, and demonstrated once again that British infantry, properly commanded, could beat French troops regardless of the odds. It was a complete tactical victory, but the cost was terrible. British casualties numbered about 1,500, killed, wounded, and missing. French casualties were higher, perhaps 3,000 to 4,000, but for an army of 14,000 in hostile territory, far from reinforcement, losing 1,500 men was serious. And among the wounded was the army's commander. Abercrombie's wound became infected, almost inevitable in the era before antibiotics. He lingered for 7 days, remaining conscious and aware, issuing orders for the siege of Alexandria, concerned about his soldiers' welfare to the end. He died on March 28, 1801, aboard HMS Foudroyant in Abercrombie. His last words reportedly concerned provisions for his troops. Britain mourned Abercrombie as a national hero. He'd led from the front at age 67. He'd been wounded while personally leading his troops. He'd won a crucial victory and then died from wounds sustained achieving it. It was exactly the kind of heroic commander death that Victorian Britain would celebrate. Abercrombie was buried at sea in Abercrombie, near where Nelson had won his great victory 3 years earlier. Command passed to Major General John Helly Hutchinson. He continued the campaign methodically. Alexandria was besieged. French forces in Cairo, cut off and unsupported, negotiated surrender terms. By September 1801, the French had evacuated Egypt completely. Napoleon's Eastern Empire was finished. Not a single French soldier remained. The strategic consequences were enormous. Britain had expelled France from Egypt, eliminated the threat to India, and secured British naval dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. The Rosetta Stone, discovered by French scholars during Napoleon's occupation, was claimed by Britain as spoils of war and shipped to London, where it remains in the British Museum today. France's ambitions in the East were permanently ended. Britain emerged as the dominant power in the region, a position it would maintain for the next century and a half. But beyond strategy and politics, Alexandria demonstrated something fundamental about British military capability. The 28th Regiment's back-to-back fighting became legendary because it symbolised everything the British Army valued: discipline under impossible circumstances, courage when surrounded, professionalism that maintained formation even when tactical doctrine said formation should collapse. Those soldiers didn't panic when attacked from the rear. They turned around and kept fighting. Military historians study Alexandria as a masterpiece of infantry tactics under pressure. The British formations, attacked by cavalry and infantry simultaneously, held because the soldiers trusted their training, their officers, and each other. When the rear rank turned to face French cavalry, they knew the front rank would hold against French infantry. That mutual trust, that absolute confidence in the man beside you, that's what allowed impossible defensive situations to be won. The back-to-back fighting also highlighted a crucial advantage British infantry possessed: superior musketry. British soldiers were trained to fire faster and more accurately than their French counterparts. In a back-to-back situation, where rapid fire was essential to keep both enemy forces at bay, British rate of fire made the difference between survival and destruction. The 28th volleys dropped enough French cavalry and infantry that both attacks lost momentum simultaneously. Abercrombie's heroic death added a human dimension that made Alexandria resonate with British audiences. Here was a 67-year-old general who didn't need to expose himself to danger, who could have commanded from the rear, who'd already proven his courage in decades of service. But he led from the front anyway, because that's what his soldiers needed. His death wasn't wasteful or pointless. He'd been where he needed to be, doing what a commander must do, and his soldiers won the battle he'd orchestrated. Alexandria also validated British confidence that they could defeat French forces in any environment. The French army that Napoleon had led to Egypt included veterans of his Italian campaigns, soldiers who'd stormed fortresses and won battles across Europe. They'd survived 3 years in a hostile climate, facing disease, heat, and isolation. They were tough, experienced, dangerous opponents, and British regulars had defeated them in open battle in the Egyptian desert. If British infantry could win there, they could win anywhere. The campaign had political ramifications beyond the immediate military victory. Napoleon had abandoned his army in Egypt, leaving 30,000 soldiers to die or surrender. When they finally returned to France after British repatriation, they told stories of abandonment, broken promises, and a commander who valued his political career more than his soldiers' lives. This damaged Napoleon's reputation among the French army, a wound that would fester throughout his later campaigns. For Britain, Alexandria was proof that expeditionary warfare could succeed with proper planning and competent command. Abercrombie's operation, amphibious landing in hostile territory, advance across unfamiliar terrain, battle against numerically superior enemy, had succeeded despite enormous challenges. This validated British confidence in their ability to project power globally, a confidence that would underpin British imperial strategy for the next century. The Battle of Alexandria also demonstrated the importance of naval superiority. Nelson's victory at the Nile had trapped the French army in Egypt. British naval control allowed Abercrombie's expedition to land unopposed by French warships. Throughout the campaign, the Royal Navy provided supplies, reinforcements, and gunfire support. Without that naval dominance, the entire operation would have been impossible. Alexandria was a joint operation in the modern sense, army and navy working together toward a unified strategic goal. Today, the battlefield at Alexandria is buried under modern urban development. The desert where British soldiers fought back to back is now Egyptian suburbs. But the Gloucestershire Regiment's back badge tradition continues. Every soldier who wears those 2 cap badges honours ancestors who faced attacks from both sides and won through discipline and courage. It's a living memorial to one extraordinary moment in British military history. The legacy of Alexandria extends beyond one battle or one campaign. It established patterns that would define British military operations throughout the 19th century. Professional soldiers maintaining discipline under pressure, competent commanders leading from the front, amphibious operations supported by naval power, willingness to fight in any climate or terrain. These patterns, proven at Alexandria, would carry Britain through the Napoleonic Wars and the countless colonial campaigns that followed. Alexandria also marked the end of Napoleon's Egyptian dream. He'd envisioned a French empire stretching from the Mediterranean to India, rivaling Alexander the Great's conquests. Instead, his army was destroyed or captured, his fleet was annihilated, and British forces occupied the territory he'd claimed for France. It was a complete strategic failure, disguised by Napoleon's propaganda, but revealed by British victory on the field. For the families of the 1,500 British casualties, Alexandria was costly. Sons, husbands, fathers who'd survived the landing, and the advance died in the desert, fighting French troops far from home. Abercrombie himself, a respected general, a father, a man weeks from retirement, died from wounds that might seem preventable today. War was never clean or glorious for those who actually fight it. Alexandria was a victory, but it was purchased with British blood. Yet what those soldiers achieved mattered. They defeated Napoleon's veterans in open battle. They'd maintained formation when surrounded. They'd fought back to back when tactical doctrine said that situation meant death. They'd proven British discipline was equal to any challenge. And they'd ended French ambitions in the East, securing British strategic position in the Mediterranean for generations. If this is the kind of history that matters to you, battles where British soldiers faced impossible tactical situations and won through training and courage, where commanders led from the front and died heroically, where one regiment's back-to-back fighting created traditions that endure today, then you know what to do. These are the stories that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching Britain's history, the battles that shaped a nation, told the way they deserve to be told.